The French and Indian War, fought from 1754 to 1763, was a pivotal conflict that reshaped the landscape of North America. It was a struggle for control of the vast territories and resources of the continent, pitting the colonial ambitions of Great Britain against those of France. Though primarily a European conflict, the war unfolded on North American soil, drawing in Native American allies on both sides. At the heart of the dispute lay the resource-rich Ohio Valley, a region claimed by both the French and the British. The French, seeking to protect their fur trade and link their Canadian holdings with their Louisiana territory, began constructing a series of forts in the region. This aggressive expansion alarmed the British colonists, who also had their eyes on the fertile lands west of the Appalachian Mountains. The conflict ignited in 1754 at Fort Necessity, a hastily constructed British outpost in present-day Pennsylvania. A young Virginian militia officer named George Washington, leading a small force against the French, found himself forced to surrender the fort after a brief but fierce battle. This clash, though seemingly insignificant in the grand scheme of the war, marked the beginning of a much larger conflagration that would engulf much of North America. The early years of the war saw a string of French victories. French forces, aided by their Native American allies, proved adept at wilderness warfare, ambushing British columns and overrunning isolated outposts. The British, accustomed to more formal European battle tactics, struggled to adapt to the dense forests and unfamiliar terrain. In 1755, British General Edward Braddock led a disastrous expedition against Fort Duquesne, the French stronghold at the forks of the Ohio River. Braddock's army, burdened by heavy equipment and marching in rigid formation, was routed by a smaller force of French and Native American warriors. Braddock himself was killed, and the defeat sent shockwaves through the British colonies. Despite these early setbacks, the British government remained determined to prevail in North America. They poured resources into the war effort, dispatching more troops and appointing more experienced commanders. Gradually, the tide began to turn as the British learned to adapt their tactics and exploit their logistical advantages. The year 1759 proved to be a turning point in the war. British forces, under the command of General James Wolfe, laid siege to Quebec City, the capital of New France. Perched atop a steep cliff overlooking the St. Lawrence River, Quebec seemed impregnable. However, Wolfe devised a daring plan to scale the cliffs and attack the French from an unexpected direction. In the early hours of September 13th, British troops landed on the Plains of Abraham, a plateau just outside the city walls. The ensuing battle was short but decisive. Both Wolfe and the French commander, the Marquis de Montcalm, were mortally wounded, but the British emerged victorious, capturing Quebec and dealing a crippling blow to French power in North America. The fall of Quebec marked the beginning of the end for New France. Although the French fought on for several more years, they were unable to dislodge the British from their strategic foothold in Canada. With the capture of Montreal in 1760, French resistance in North America effectively collapsed. Section 4. Indigenous peoples, caught between empires. The French and Indian War had a profound impact on the indigenous peoples of North America. Caught between two competing European powers, Native American nations were often forced to choose sides or risk being crushed between them. Many allied themselves with the French, who they saw as less of a threat to their traditional lands and way of life. The French, with their smaller population and greater reliance on the fur trade, had generally maintained more amicable relations with Native Americans. They often intermarried with indigenous women and adopted aspects of Native American culture. The British, on the other hand, were seen as more expansionist and more likely to encroach upon Native American territory. The war's outcome had devastating consequences for many Native American communities. With the French defeated, indigenous peoples lost their most important European ally and were left at the mercy of the victorious British. The British, no longer needing to court Native American support, began to assert their dominance over indigenous lands, sparking further conflict and resentment. Section 5. The Treaty of Paris. redrawing the map of North America. The war formally ended in 1763 with the signing of the Treaty of Paris. The treaty, negotiated between Britain, France, and Spain, redrew the map of North America. France ceded all of its Canadian territory to Britain, effectively ending French colonial rule in North America. Britain also gained control of Florida from Spain, consolidating its grip on the eastern seaboard. The Treaty of Paris marked a significant shift in the balance of power in North America. Britain emerged as the dominant colonial power on the continent, while France's once vast empire was reduced to a few scattered islands in the Caribbean. The treaty also had far-reaching consequences for the indigenous peoples of North America, who were now subject to British rule. The treaty, however, did little to address the underlying tensions between the British and their American colonies. The war had left Britain deeply in debt, and the British government sought to recoup some of its losses by imposing new taxes on the colonies. These taxes, along with other grievances, would eventually lead to the American Revolution. Section 6. A Legacy of Change. The Impact on Future Conflicts. The French and Indian War had a profound impact on the future of North America. It not only determined the fate of Canada, but also shaped the course of relations between Britain and its American colonies. The war also left a lasting legacy on the indigenous peoples of the continent, who were drawn into a conflict that was not their own, and ultimately suffered greatly from its outcome. For Britain, the victory in the French and Indian War marked the zenith of its colonial power, but also sowed the seeds of future conflict. The war left Britain with a vast new territory to administer and defend, a task that proved both costly and challenging. Moreover, the war had exposed tensions between the British government and the American colonists, who resented what they saw as British interference in their affairs. The French and Indian War also had a significant impact on military thinking. The war's emphasis on wilderness fighting and irregular tactics influenced the development of military doctrine on both sides of the Atlantic. The experience gained by American colonial officers and soldiers during the war would prove invaluable in the fight for independence just a few years later. Section 7. Conclusion. The enduring significance of a continental struggle. The French and Indian War was a pivotal event in the history of North America. It was a struggle for control of a continent, a clash of empires that forever altered the political landscape. The war's legacy can be seen in the borders that divide Canada and the United States, in the complex relationship between indigenous peoples and the descendants of European colonists, and in the echoes of colonial ambition that still resonate today. Though often overshadowed by the American Revolution that followed, the French and Indian War was a conflict of immense significance. It determined the fate of Canada, shaped the destiny of the United States, and left an indelible mark on the indigenous peoples who were caught in the crossfire. Understanding the French and Indian War is essential to comprehending the forces that shaped North America and the complex interplay of history, culture, and identity that continues to define the continent today.